Okay, so now I'm going to put my very heavy wheel onto this e-bike, which is a lot of trouble because it's got torque plates here, torque plates, and it's got some connectors. Here's the harness. It has 3 motor wires and a 5-pin hall sensor and a 2-pin temp sensor connector. 5 connectors. So I think it's a lot of trouble. So I have a power lift because my bike weighs 95 pounds. And I've completely removed the chain because I find that a lot easier. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clear this and I'm going to set the wheel in there, which weighs 35 pounds, so you'll hear me grunting and stuff. So this is stable. I got the brake on the power lift, and this is tight. So the first step is to drop the motor in such that the motor wiring harness is emanating down, so that when it rains, this bike is upside down right now, so that when it rains, the water goes down into what they call a drip loop. So here's this wheel that has 9 tire liners in it. So there's the motor wiring harness. In the video it's going up, but it's actually down, so I've got a crush washer on this side, so I got to spread the dropouts a little. So that went in. So that went in nicely. And see if anything's interfering. Something's rubbing. What's rubbing? The brakes are rubbing because the torque plate, one of the bolts that anchors in the torque plate, also attaches the adapter for the rear brake caliper. So I may have to adjust the brake caliper later. So this is seated all the way in there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put on the torque plates. So on one side, I made these torque plates up custom. One of the torque plates has 3 holes. One of the holes is larger. That's for the brake adapter. So I'm over here looking for a large bolt. Here it is, and I'll get some Loctite. And as I'm doing this, I'm keeping my wits about myself so that I don't forget any lubrication or, I used to not disconnect the chain and I would get this all together and not put the chain on. Anyway, I'm using blue Loctite on the bolt. This is for the adapter. So here's this torque plate. It's very tight fit. And looks like it wants to go like this. Very tight fit, very frustrating. I'll need some luck for that to go in. There's an M5 P-handled hex key. So is that going right in? It's my completely lucky day. Okay, so I'm just gonna loosely anchor that, making sure not to get any grease or Loctite on the rotor. And I've got my bolts here for the torque plate. These are M5 bolts. And this, like I say, this is just a crazy tight fit. So I'm going to have to do some jiggling. Here I'm not using Loctite. This is an M4, a 4mm P-handle wrench. So that looks like it got started, but I'm not going to get greedy. I'm going to try to get this one started. My torque plates are such a tight fit, it's never going to go in on the first time. But they are strong. The torque plates are 303 stainless, and they're a 1/4 inch thick. Okay, so that's coming through. I'm not in a position to move the camera because I'm by myself, so this is in there kind of loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a nut, line it up, and screw the bolt into the nut, get it started. And this is just going like butter. I have a lot of different bikes, and some of them are really frustrating to get the torque plates in there, but I like them tight. So how are we doing starting this nut? It's going beautifully. So I'm not going to tighten it because I still have to get the other side. So I'm going to get this to where it's anchored, and it's not going to fall apart, but it's still going to have a little bit of play because of the other side. Okay. Here I am doing the other side, which is the same thing, but this torque plate only has 2 bolts because there's no brake caliper over there. Here's the big M16 flange nut, which I had powder coated to match the frame, and I also had the torque plate powder coated to match the frame and the fork. I like stuff to match and be black. So that's not threading on there very nicely. It's threading on, it's just kind of greasy. It's not cross-threaded. So I'm going to start this axle nut, but I'm certainly not going to tighten it. Definitely not cross-threaded. Good, good. Here I'm putting in the other bolt. And it's going in very easily. This must be an easy bike. Like I say, I have 5 bikes that are all exactly like this, and some of the torque plates go on probably too tightly. This one's nice. So that went on there just like it was born there. And now I'm putting on the axle nut, making sure not to cross-thread it. That one went on nicely. So now what I'm going to do is sequential and incremental tightening on all these bolts. For the torque plate bolts, I have a 8mm wrench, and this would be an M4 hex key. So here I am with my incremental tightening. I think the P-handle wrench is going to be more comfortable. So there, I'm not doing the crazy tightening. I'm going to torque this to spec, and I have to Google that. And all the while, that thread locking compound is drying, so that's working against me. So I'll just tighten that a little more. Like I say, I'm keeping my wits about myself. Have I forgotten anything? No, I haven't. So that is less than the torque spec. Cozy up the axle nut a little bit. I know that's 50 or 60 foot-pounds. Okay. Now these torque plates really hold the axle in place. I'm going to rotate it now to make sure that it's not rubbing on the frame. It's got about 3/4 of an inch clearance, so that's beautiful. And it's centered. So that's lucky. Here I am tightening a torque bolt. Not all the way. I'm going to get them all really tight, and I'm going to go through and do the final tightening. That's pretty tight. Between this torque nut bolt and the tall gear cog on my 5-speed freewheel, there's like 5 or 6 millimeters of space. So that's enough. So this is very tight, but not crazy tight. I'm using the Bondus end. And now I'm tightening up the axle nut over here. That is pretty tight. So now I'm going to tighten the axle nut over here. Pretty darn tight, but not crazy tight. And here's a good tightening on the brake adapter bolt. You definitely don't want to over tighten that because that brake adapter is aluminum and the bolt is a grade 12 M6 bolt. I've stripped one of those before. So now this is the final tightening on the torque plate bolts. And I definitely don't want to overdo it here because this side has 3 bolts and the other side has 2 bolts. So, and it's also held in place by the axle nut. So there's a little room for error there. So I'm not going to go crazy. That's firm, but it's not crazy. And that is plenty firm. And here I'm checking that this is tight. It's really tight. And then here I'm just checking on the brake adapter bolt, which is holding down the torque plate. And it's plenty tight. Now I'm doing what might be the final tightening on this axle nut. I get it firm. Definitely not overdoing it. And this is the final tightening on these torque plate bolts. I always have to remind myself not to be a maniac here. Good, good. And this is the last bolt. So now that's on. I've got the wheel on. So I will continue the video when I put in my my pannier boxes that hold the battery.